I walked into the dining room that evening feeling a rare spark of pride. I had spent the entire week preparing for this dinner, making sure every dish was perfect, the table impeccably set, and the wine chilled just right. My son had recently moved into his new apartment, and I wanted this night to be about celebrating him, about showing that, despite everything, family still mattered. But the second I took my seat, the air shifted. His eyes, usually warm when they looked at me, were cold, hard, and accusatory. "You're being selfish," he said, his voice slicing through the cheerful chatter. I blinked, startled, not expecting this venom from my own child. Before I could even respond, my daughter-in-law, red-faced and trembling with fury, grabbed her wine glass and hurled it across the table. The crimson liquid arced through the air, landing squarely on my shirt. Shock rooted me to my chair. Humiliation burned my cheeks as the room fell silent. Everyone froze, watching me, some in confusion, others in barely concealed amusement. My heart pounded, a mixture of disbelief and hurt swirling inside me. I had spent years providing for them, smoothing over every conflict, supporting every whim, and yet this was the gratitude I received, a direct public insult. The laughter of the younger cousins and the awkward coughs of the adults only deepened the sting. I forced myself to remain seated, gripping the edge of the table to stop my hands from shaking. Inside, rage simmered beneath the surface, but I knew any reaction now would only give them more satisfaction. I swallowed hard, trying to collect my thoughts as the room buzzed with tension. This was no longer a celebration. It was the moment I realized just how little respect they had for me, and how easily they could humiliate me in front of everyone I cared about. The night I had envisioned as joyful had transformed into a battlefield of emotions, and I could feel the first seeds of a plan forming, though I didn't yet understand the full extent of what I would do next. As I sat there, soaked in wine and shock, my mind began to replay years of sacrifices, each one flashing before my eyes like a cruel montage. I remembered the nights I stayed up late helping my son with school projects, sacrificing my own sleep and comfort, only for him to roll his eyes or mutter complaints under his breath. I recalled paying for my daughter-in-law's tuition, covering medical bills when she got sick, and attending every family event, even when it meant missing important work opportunities. And for what? The bitter taste of disdain, now made literal, stained my chest. Each memory collided with the humiliation of the present, magnifying the sting of that thrown wine. I saw the countless moments they had dismissed my efforts, birthdays I organized that were ignored, holidays where my contributions went unacknowledged, dinners where my presence was tolerated rather than appreciated. The contrast between my devotion and their contempt was unbearable, and my throat tightened with a mix of anger and sorrow. I remembered the subtle digs, the snide remarks, the silent treatments after I'd bent over backward for them. They had always taken my generosity for granted, believing I would never challenge them, believing that my love could be weaponized against me. And now, in the most public, humiliating way possible, they were proving me right. Their laughter and whispers echoed in my mind like a cruel soundtrack. But beneath the initial shock, a fire was igniting. I could feel clarity forming through the haze of betrayal. I could no longer be passive. I could no longer allow them to strip me of dignity without consequence. The wine on my chest was more than a mess. It was a statement, one I was determined to answer with strategy rather than impulse. The humiliation that had once paralyzed me was slowly transforming into resolve, and for the first time that evening, I understood that this betrayal might be the catalyst I needed to reclaim control over the family that had so carelessly disregarded me. Sitting alone at the edge of the table, I felt the weight of years pressing down on me, heavier than any wine stain could. The laughter, the whispers, the accusing stares. It all felt like a wall closing in, reminding me how utterly alone I had become in my own family. I kept replaying their words in my head, trying to make sense of it. "You're selfish." The accusation stung more than the thrown wine. Every sacrifice I'd made, every ounce of patience, every sleepless night, felt invisible, worthless. I wondered if it had all been for nothing. Was this what family loyalty meant? Endless giving, endless bending, only to be humiliated and dismissed. My heart ached as I realized that the people I had trusted the most were the very ones undermining me. Empathy rose like a tide within me, not for them but for myself. I remembered all the quiet moments of compromise, the overlooked birthdays, the jobs I passed up, the financial strains I endured silently. The audience could feel the betrayal with me, the helplessness of giving everything and receiving contempt in return. My mind vacillated between anger and despair, between wanting to storm out and wanting to dissolve into tears. I questioned whether love alone could ever earn respect, or if I had been fooling myself all these years. The silence of the room only amplified my isolation, making every glance toward me feel like a judgment. For the first time, I understood the true depth of the emotional scars left by ungrateful family members, and the gnawing realization settled in. I had to confront not just their actions, but the very imbalance of loyalty and appreciation that had defined my life. As I sat there, drenched and seething, I couldn't help but think of everything I had built, everything I had quietly achieved while they mocked or ignored me. Years of long hours at work, promotions earned, investments grown, a home filled with memories and stability, all accomplishments they either took for granted or dismissed entirely. My heart ached at the contrast. Here I was, a man who had sacrificed so much, reduced in their eyes to a punchline in a moment of cruel theatrics. The sting wasn't just embarrassment, it was the fear of being underestimated, of having my efforts devalued, of watching them believe they were superior to me. That fear, sharp and bitter, twisted in my chest like a warning, but beneath it, a strange clarity began to emerge. If they thought they could disrespect me so easily, if they believed they held the power, they were sorely mistaken. Their arrogance and disregard had opened a door I had not noticed before, a path where the tables could be turned. In that moment, the seeds of a reversal took root, and I allowed myself the smallest spark of anticipation. One day, they would see just how wrong they had been. I could feel my pulse in my temples, a mix of fury and disbelief boiling inside me. Every fiber of my body screamed that I could no longer sit silently while they humiliated me, while they believed they could disrespect me without consequence. My hands hovered over my phone, trembling slightly, as I typed the message I had been rehearsing in my mind for hours. "I need your advice," I wrote, trying to steady my fingers, "about what just happened and what my rights are." The words felt almost liberating, each letter a tiny act of defiance against the chaos they had created. I hit send, and a strange calm washed over me, the first sense of control I had felt all evening. I imagined them laughing, confident in their superiority, completely unaware that the tide was about to turn. Their arrogance had blinded them, and soon they would learn that underestimating me was their gravest mistake. I pressed send and waited. They had no idea what was coming. After sending the message to my lawyer, I realized that anger alone wouldn't be enough. If I wanted them to truly understand the consequences of their actions, I needed proof, concrete, undeniable evidence of every slight, every betrayal, every time my generosity had been taken for granted. Over the next few days, I meticulously went through bank statements, receipts, and old messages, compiling a record of financial support I had provided for years. School fees, rent, unexpected medical bills, even small gestures that had been dismissed as trivial. I dug up past texts where they had complained, mocked, or subtly undermined me, capturing the pattern of disrespect that had gone unchecked for far too long. Each piece of evidence felt like fuel, and as I organized it all, I began to feel a sense of power I hadn't experienced in years. I was no longer the passive parent. I was the architect of a plan, carefully laying the groundwork for their reckoning. The anticipation built with each file I saved, each document I labeled, each memory revisited. I imagined their faces when confronted with undeniable proof, how disbelief would crack into panic, how smug laughter would falter. By the time I finished, I had a dossier that told the story of their entitlement, their arrogance, and their short-sighted cruelty. The suspense was almost tangible. The audience could feel the slow, deliberate build-up, the quiet hum of impending justice. Every calculated step strengthened the inevitability of the payoff, and I knew that when the moment came, it wouldn't just be my satisfaction. It would be a lesson they would never forget. I waited until the house had quieted and the guests had left before I approached them. Confrontation in front of others would have been theater, and I needed something quieter, more deliberate. My son was stacking plates in the kitchen, jaw tight, hands moving with a practiced efficiency that betrayed his unease. I didn't raise my voice. I met his eyes and let the silence do the work. "Why did you do that?" I asked, the question small but heavy. He shrugged, too casual by half. "You make everything about yourself," he said like a rehearsed line. His daughter-in-law hovered nearby, folding napkins with exaggerated care, gleeful in her triumph. I felt the old ache of being dismissed, but I kept my face calm. I remembered the dossiers I had been compiling, the months of proof sitting in neat folders on my desk. That knowledge felt like armor. "I've given you more than most parents," I said quietly. "I've backed you when it counted. I've been there through illness, rent, tuition, everything. Calling me selfish after that is astonishing." Their reactions were immediate. A flicker of guilt, quickly smoothed over by defensiveness. My son muttered that I didn't understand his life, that I was controlling, that I lectured too much. The same old script, but this time I didn't plead. I listened, and as they spoke, I chose my words like stones to place on a path. Measured, deliberate. "If you think my support is a burden, tell me which moments you felt forced. Tell me which times I overstepped." "Be specific," she spat at the air between us, voice sharp. "You're always judging. You act like you paid for our lives." That was the line. The very entitlement I had documented. I let it hang. I kept my tone steady. "Judge me if you like. But I also keep records. I keep receipts. I keep texts. I remember the nights you begged for help, and I answered without hesitation." Their faces changed when I mentioned specifics, dates, amounts, text lines that landed like small knives. I saw confusion, then irritation, then the subtle shift to calculating fear. I wasn't angry so much as placidly efficient, and that unnerved them more than a shout ever could. We spoke for a long time, but not the kind of talk that resolves things. It was reconnaissance. I let them speak their grievances while I catalogued their reactions. Which details stung them, which lies they repeated, what they tried to hide. I asked innocuous questions about the deposit on the apartment, the loan they'd taken, who had covered the emergency vet bill for the neighbor's dog, and watched their faces. Each answer, each hesitation, was another dot on the map I was drawing quietly in my head. At one point, my son slammed a cabinet, impatience flashing across his features. "You're making this worse," he accused. I smiled, the smallest, most controlled smile I could manage. "Maybe. Or maybe I'm finally treating my life with the same seriousness you treat yours." After that night, they went to bed thinking I had been wounded and browbeaten. They believed the old script was intact. Me, the forgiving parent, humiliated but harmless. They didn't see the way I catalogued their words afterward, how I filed the small confessions and the careless boasts away. They didn't know I was building a case as carefully as I had once built my home. They were underestimating me, and that would be their mistake. I closed the kitchen door, files waiting on my desk, and the next move would land thunderously. A few days later, the tension in the house was palpable, though no one could quite name it. I received a message from my lawyer confirming that the letter had been sent, and I knew the moment had arrived. That evening, the mail arrived, and my son, curious as always, tore it open without thinking twice. The first words on the page stopped him cold. As he read, his face paled, and the confident smirk he usually wore faltered. I watched quietly from the other room, allowing the suspense to stretch. The letter was precise, detailed, and unyielding, outlining the years of financial support, the documented incidents of disrespect, and the potential legal consequences if decorum and restitution were not immediately addressed. It wasn't just a warning. It was proof in black and white, a mirror reflecting the arrogance they had assumed was untouchable. I saw the subtle tremor in his hands, the shift in posture from defiance to unease. For the first time in years, they realized that I wasn't powerless, that my love and patience had limits, and that crossing them had real consequences. The house, usually filled with laughter and casual chatter, now felt heavy with apprehension. I let the silence stretch, savoring the subtle victory, knowing the balance of power had shifted. The daughter-in-law glanced at me nervously, and I could see her mind racing, trying to recalculate her strategy. But it was too late. The emotional satisfaction that coursed through me wasn't about vengeance for its own sake. It was about finally being seen, finally being acknowledged, and finally reclaiming the control that had been quietly slipping away for far too long. The first power reversal had landed, and the family now understood that underestimating me had been a grave mistake. The next few days, they tried to act as if nothing had happened. My son smiled politely at me, as if the wine, the accusations, the humiliation had been some trivial misunderstanding. His wife nodded enthusiastically at casual conversation, pretending their audacity was harmless. But I could see the cracks, the subtle hesitation in their voices, the fleeting glances exchanged when they thought I wasn't looking. They were panicking, though they didn't fully admit it, and I let them. I maintained my calm, answering questions slowly, carefully, my tone measured, my expression neutral. The contrast between my composure and their growing unease was deliciously sharp. I imagined the audience sitting with me, feeling the tension, the FOMO of knowing I held all the cards while they floundered in ignorance. Every forced smile, every slight stammer from them amplified my quiet satisfaction. I allowed them to underestimate me, to believe that the incident was behind us, while in reality, the gears of my plan were turning relentlessly. The more they tried to downplay their behavior, the more their panic showed, and I could almost feel the anticipation building in those watching. Everyone could sense the impending reckoning. Their desperation was palpable, and I knew the payoff would be all the sweeter because they had convinced themselves I was powerless. I knew subtlety could only take me so far. If I wanted them to truly understand the consequences of their arrogance, the next step had to be visible, undeniable. I chose the setting carefully. A semi-public dinner with extended family and close friends, where their pride and reputation mattered most. As we gathered, I kept my tone casual, my smile effortless, letting them believe the tension of the past week had passed. But beneath the surface, I had orchestrated every detail. Between courses, I mentioned past incidents with ease, casually referencing the years of support, the loans covered, and the moments they had disrespected me. Each detail landed like a hammer strike. Their faces shifted. First confusion, then embarrassment, and finally panic as the realization of how public these truths had become dawned on them. I didn't shout or accuse. I simply narrated, letting the facts speak for themselves. By the time dessert arrived, whispers circulated among our guests, glances exchanged, questions muttered under breath. The son's jaw tightened. His wife fidgeted nervously, and I could see their carefully constructed facade crumbling. The audience would feel the dramatic tension, the fear, the shame, the quiet panic, building with every sentence I delivered. This was the moment the imbalance became clear. My composure, my record, and my deliberate exposure of their disrespect had flipped the power dynamic completely. I was no longer just a parent or a victim. I was the arbiter of justice in that room, and they had nowhere to hide. The moment I had been building toward arrived with the precision of a plan long in motion. My lawyer coordinated the final steps, and the consequences landed squarely on my son and daughter-in-law, far beyond anything they had anticipated. Notices of reimbursement for years of unacknowledged support arrived, alongside legal warnings that made clear their actions could no longer be ignored. But the humiliation wasn't just legal, it was deeply personal. At a family gathering I had invited them to, I calmly recounted the wine incident, framing it with context, dates, and witness recollections. Every eye in the room followed my words, the tension thick as if it had weight, and I watched as their smug confidence collapsed. My son's face turned red, then pale, as his wife's smirk faded into embarrassment, shame, and disbelief. Their attempts to interject or minimize fell flat. The facts supported by evidence were indisputable. I could see friends and relatives exchanging glances, murmuring their astonishment, and even outsiders at the table felt the gravity of the situation. The moment wasn't loud or theatrical. It was surgical, precise, and utterly satisfying. The same people who had thrown wine at me, who had assumed I would never act, were now scrambling, powerless, exposed in a way that would linger in their memories for years. I felt a surge of vindication and quiet joy, the culmination of meticulous planning, patience, and unwavering composure. Finally, the balance had shifted entirely. The arrogance and entitlement that had defined their behavior were met with the cold, unyielding weight of consequences. The wine, once a symbol of my humiliation, had become the emblem of their downfall, a poetic reminder that disrespect carries a price. And as I looked around the room, seeing both the astonishment and the justice delivered, I allowed myself a rare smile, knowing that the moment of reckoning had been executed perfectly. After the chaos settled and the room emptied, I sat alone, letting the quiet wash over me like a balm. The anger that had burned so fiercely in the days following the dinner had transformed into a steady clarity. I reflected on every insult, every thrown glance, every slight that had chipped away at my pride over the years. Betrayal had cut deep, but it had also illuminated truths I had ignored for too long. The imbalance of respect and loyalty in a family I had once thought untouchable. Relief mingled with a subtle melancholy. I had achieved vindication, yet the victory felt bittersweet. The people I had loved and nurtured were now humbled, some permanently strained in their pride, and I could not undo that. But in this moment, I understood something crucial. My worth had never been defined by their approval or disdain. The lessons of patience, endurance, and careful strategy had crystallized within me, teaching me that dignity and composure could wield power more profoundly than anger alone. I allowed myself to feel the full spectrum of emotions: grief for the relationships lost, satisfaction in justice served, and a quiet empowerment that came from knowing I had acted with integrity and precision. As I breathed deeply, I realized that the wine thrown, the accusations made, and the years of neglect had all led me to this point, a place of calm, confidence, and insight. The betrayal remained a wound, but it had been transformed into a catalyst for growth, leaving me stronger, wiser, and quietly triumphant in ways that would resonate long after the echoes of the past had faded. In the days that followed, the repercussions of that night rippled far beyond our immediate household. Relatives who had once sided with my son, or turned blind eyes, now approached me with quiet acknowledgement, some apologetic, others curious about how I had orchestrated the turnaround. Friends who had attended the dinners whispered in admiration, marveling at the precision of the reversal. The daughter-in-law's social circle had caught wind of the events, and gossip traveled fast, highlighting her arrogance and missteps. Karma, I realized, wasn't just about legal restitution. It was social, emotional, and visible to everyone who mattered. The wine incident became a symbol, referenced in hushed tones or playful jabs at gatherings, a constant reminder that entitlement and disrespect carry consequences. Even my son, previously so assured, began recalibrating his behavior, wary of further exposure. The balance had shifted permanently, and the lesson echoed through our circles. The choices you make and the way you treat others rarely go unnoticed, and the universe has a way of ensuring accountability, often in ways more public and undeniable than anyone expects. Weeks later, I found myself in a quiet, sunlit room, reflecting on everything that had transpired. The chaos, the humiliation, the carefully executed strategy, all of it had led me to this place of calm and dignity. My son and daughter-in-law had retreated into their own reckoning, their pride tempered by undeniable lessons learned, and the household now hummed with a more balanced energy. I no longer carried the weight of unspoken resentment. Instead, I felt empowered, knowing that I had acted with both intelligence and restraint. Each choice I had made, meticulous, deliberate, and measured, had restored my sense of authority and self-worth. I realized that true power doesn't demand shouting or spectacle. It emerges quietly, from composure, patience, and strategic action. Sitting in the sunlight, I allowed myself to acknowledge the bitter victories and the small joys of justice finally served. The wine, once a mark of humiliation, had become a symbol of my resilience, and the echoes of the past no longer held me captive. I smiled, feeling a deep, cathartic release, and understood that empowerment isn't about revenge alone. It's about reclaiming your life, your voice, and your dignity. For the first time in years, I felt entirely at peace, confident that the moral arc had bent toward fairness, and that the lesson of respect, loyalty, and accountability would resonate long after the echoes of anger had faded. The audience could sense it too. The satisfaction of witnessing balance restored, of seeing justice executed with calm authority, and the quiet triumph of someone finally recognized for the worth they had always carried.